Hi folks, you're with Tacitus Today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the claims that are being put about by the Trump haters and the globalist goons and the globalist cabal that because of the tariffs that President Trump and his administration are imposing on goods being imported into the United States, that because of those tariffs, world trade will shrink by $2 trillion over the next 12 months, such is the claim. Now, these claims being made by various international groups, people that work for the World Bank or the International Monetary Fund, and every institution that's controlled, the United Nations is controlled by the globalist goon cabal. They've all come out and said that it, and this they all Trump hit pieces come out by the second from these places, so you can't really attach too much to it. Trump derangement syndrome is the minimum that you could really ascribe to these people. But nonetheless, that's the claim. Trade is going to shrink by $2 trillion over the next 12 months. Now, that's $2 trillion isn't it's a decent sized sum, and if that's so, then let's take a look, because who wants trade to shrink by $2 trillion? So let's have a look at this. Now, if I go through all the articles, they're very vague on the details are skinny, to say the least. And so going through, they don't say where or how this $2 trillion or the shrinking of world trade, as they say, how will it shrink? What countries will be affected? Now, again, there's anecdotal stuff. One Jose Guadalajara from Mexico says that his 2 little children in school may go without something because of Trump's tariffs. So they do that sort of reporting, and it's very sort of sad and pathos, and there's a peasant family in the mountains of Peru, and they're not going to have this because of Trump's tariffs. But when you sort of look and say, well, all right, then, hey, show me the facts here. If it is, as you say, shrinking by $2 trillion, which is an estimate, of course, how will it shrink? Why will it shrink? What's the cause? Oh, it's the tariffs. Yeah, okay, sure. But how are these tariffs going to cause this shrinking that you referred to? And of that, there's zero detail. Now, there's all sorts of speculations, but zero detail. So if you try and sort of drill down and just see what they're talking about, or if there's any validity at all, clearly the globalists do not like the rearrangement of trade that's being caused by or will be precipitated and caused by these tariffs that President Trump is putting in place. Now, tariffs already existed. Every country that's being tariffed already puts tariffs on the United States. So the articles that I've read argue that there was no such thing as a tariff ever. I mean, no tariffs anywhere, and only President Trump is imposing tariffs. And this is going to cause the global trading system to crash, to fall apart because of Hitler. And of course, this is absolute, utter, bald-faced lies and nonsense. Every country that President Trump is proposing or has imposed tariffs is already putting heavy tariffs on United States goods. So this idea that it's just a unilateral thing by the US, of course, is a lie, absolute lie. But it's nonetheless one that the globalist influencers and propagandists are putting about. And every day there's a piece they're putting out somewhere making these very false and quite ridiculous claims. So as I picked apart as many articles as I bothered to read, and there's plenty of them out there, I guess coming down to it, what it is that firstly, there's a first claim that when globalization sort of kicked off, they were talking about free trade. George W. Bush was a free trade. And there's no such thing as free trade. That's bullshit. Countries like India and China and so these places and many others, by the way, the EU, they all put quite heavy tariffs on US goods. So this idea that the US is the only one putting tariffs, of course, is quite ridiculous. But there were the trading structure that the globalists talk about was that trade. The volume of trade, that is the total volume of international trade transactions, goods going back and forth, or even invisibles like services or insurance or something, that this steadily and quite substantially, by the way, increased once the globalization thing kicked off. Now, the globalists point to that and say, well, look how successful globalization is. Look at the increase in trade. But it never was an increase in trade as we would understand it, the new trade, new business, new trading that was done. It wasn't that. It never was that. And that's one of the big lies that we need to sort of cover in this video. What happened was there was vast supply chains were created, which then produced multiple transactions. So it became a double, triple, and quadruple counting of trade. So something's made in Japan, it then goes to China where it's assembled with this and that. It then goes on to Vietnam where it's assembled with something that then came in from somewhere else. And then there's a finished product which is then shipped again back to America or over to the West. So you could have 5 or 6 transactions of trade, goods moving back and forth and around, and often inflated in order to create, tax minimizations and things like that. So now, what would happen previously is the raw materials and the bits and all the bits and pieces, or nearly all of them, would have been made in the West and assembled in the West and produced in the West. So everything that was consumed in the West was being made in the West in terms of finished goods and advanced technology, whether it be washing machines or computers or whatever. Now, that of course began to change. It was already changing in many ways. Computers, as a case in point, where the manufacture of computers was being moved off to cheaper labor places like Taiwan and so on, or where things being made in Japan or again Taiwan, and where the exchange rate was being manipulated to create things that were artificially cheap and so on. So all that was happening as well. But what the globalization stage did was it split all that stuff up, and instead of being made in the West, it was then outsourced out to low-wage economies, such as China or India more in services, China more in manufacturing. And then that created a situation where there were multiple hops across the wider supply chain, where products went from here to there, to there, to there, to there. But each time that was counted as another trading transaction. So when you look at the alleged explosion increase in international trade due to globalization, once you take out that double, triple, quadruple, quintuple accounting, all those hops across the supply chain, once you take that out and just say, well, hold on a minute, you're just moving that same amount of money around 5 times. That's not 5 new transactions. That's the one transaction being counted 5 times. So once you look at it that way, you realize that world trade actually didn't increase that much. All that happened was Western manufacturing was moved to China, for example, or say more recently places like Vietnam was just moved there. That's all it was. That's all that happened. And then various components being delivered here, assembled over there, and so on and so forth. Again, a lot of it for tax minimization purposes. So this was it was not a huge increase in global trade. Now, as the size of economies sort of, like in terms of consumer goods, like say in America, they were giving more credit to people to buy consumer goods, then you would have more goods being consumed, and thus the amount of trade would increase from that. But if you look at that just in isolation, firstly, that increase was modest really in the overall scheme of things, and it was all purchased with everyone going into debt. So it was no net acquisition. And a lot of those consumer goods were poorly made trash, which have to be replaced every 5 minutes. So coming back now to the tariffs. Now, one of the promises, campaign promises that President Trump, or candidate Trump as he then was, but now President Trump made was that he would return manufacturing, particularly value-add manufacturing, high IP level manufacturing, back to the United States. And he would do that by removing the tax breaks and benefits that were extended to corporations to deindustrialize the United States. Bear in mind that the American government under globalist control was actively and aggressively and purposefully deindustrializing the United States and sending American jobs offshore. It's hard to imagine your own political representatives will be stabbing you, viciously and aggressively in the back doing that. But that's what was happening. Now, arguments could be made for, well, you can make it cheaper over there, and this, those sort of arguments could be made, but they don't really stack up to the idea that American companies could then send their manufacturing off to China and make it all tax deductible. I mean, excuse me. They still were the recipients of selling into an American market and receiving favorable American tax treatment to actually send American jobs over. I mean, it's just insane. Now, there is, you do understand to some point, so, well, the trade unions here are too difficult, so we'll send it to China where people work 6 days a week, 12 hours a day, and there are no unions. I do understand the sentiment, but the government, if any, should have moved in, I believe, the government should mean, well, if that's the problem, we, the government, the elected representatives of the people, we will solve or help solve that problem or broker some sort of a deal so we can keep the manufacturing here in the US and in the West more generally, and ensure that it's profitable. Maybe, there are fewer people and more robots, but we will solve that problem. And this is what President Trump is doing. So he's looking at trade. So if America's importing, I'll use simple numbers here. If America's importing $100 of stuff from China, but China's only buying $10 worth of stuff from America and putting heavy tariffs on American goods, President Trump is saying, hey, that's no good. That's not going to work. If you've got a small surplus and you're adding value, so I don't mind. But if you've got a surplus of that size and you're putting big tariffs on it, so you can make a choice. You can remove the tariffs on American goods so we can sell more into China. Or whatever the country is. I'll use China as the example here. You can remove the tariffs, or if you don't want to remove the tariffs, we'll put big tariffs on your stuff. So that'll encourage American manufacturers to then set up shop in the United States and manufacturing these products. So don't care what you do, but you do one or the other. Now, if any of these nations say, well, you can shove the tariffs, then we're fine. Okay, if that's the way you want it. So that these places have a choice, but they are used to getting favorable treatment. They can sell into America with low or no tariffs, but if American goods want to be sold in their country, then there are high tariffs and all sorts of difficult distribution systems to navigate that heavily favor local goods rather than imported goods. And if there isn't big bucks in it for the local, Communist Party goons or something where they can have a monopoly on all Mercs or Beamers imported into the country, that type of thing. There isn't big sort of torrent of money, river of money type monopolies available, then they're not really interested either. So anyway, that's the overall goings on. So world trade didn't increase anywhere near to the extent that the globalists are claiming. It was just the multiple transactions being double and triple and quadruple and what it encountered. That's what it was. And the tariffs were, I think, very unfair to Western countries, all contrived by the globalists, by the way, and all due to local, governments in whether it be Britain, Australia, or the US selling out their own people under the very goading and guidance of the globalists. But President Trump is turning that around. I think that's a good thing. Now that realignment that would be caused by President Trump's tariff, well, I don't think that'll affect global trade, actual global trade. Will it affect the double and triple counting stuff where, multiple hops in the splash? Sure, that'll be affected. But that is not a reduction in trade, and we need to be quite clear about that. You've been with Tacitus today, your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.